The deserted road stretched ahead, endless, and the heat of the day seemed to drag on as if the sun itself was trying to swallow the earth. The group of friends, tired from the long journey, spotted a gas station in the distance and decided to stop. The place was desolate, with no other cars or signs of life, except for the old gas pump that creaked as if it was groaning. It was the kind of place that would make anyone feel a chill, but at first no one paid much attention. Fear seemed like a distant thing, a vague memory of what horror could become. They were just stopping to refuel, right? It was clear that something was out of place, but nothing seemed especially threatening, until the silence started to weigh on them. The kind of silence that's not normal. There were no birds singing, no gentle wind sounds. Just that oppressive emptiness. In one corner of the station, the shadow of a bush swayed slightly as if someone was there watching. And of course this was ignored. After all, who would imagine that a simple refuel could be the gateway to terror? They all thought it was just another stop on the road, nothing more. But soon, fear would take hold of them in an inexplicable way, turning this simple moment into something much darker. As everyone knows, what may seem simple sometimes reveals itself to be full of hidden horrors. Sometimes it's when we're most relaxed that danger approaches, hidden in the shadows, ready to catch us by surprise. The group, distracted by the routine of their journey, had no idea that this quiet stop at an isolated gas station would be the setting for one of the most terrifying experiences of their lives. And as always happens with these stories, they stepped away from the car, relaxed, unaware that they were about to face something they would never forget. What would have happened if they had known? Raphael wasn't prepared for what happened. Everything seemed normal when he got out of the car and walked toward the bathroom, with that strange feeling of being watched, but he tried to ignore it. The landscape was desolate, as if everything around him had been swallowed by shadows. Each step he took seemed to echo deeper than usual. As he moved away from the car, a subtle chill ran down his spine, but he tried to shake off the fear. There was no reason to worry, right? But as he moved further, fear was already starting to take shape, molding itself in the shadows that stretched around him. It was then that, suddenly, he felt it. The presence. An overwhelming sensation, as if someone, or something, was approaching with alarming speed. He looked back, and on the horizon of shadows, a figure appeared. It was large, moving quickly without any sound. Like a human shadow, but much more distorted, as if it was slipping through the darkness unnaturally. Terror gripped Raphael instantly. His eyes widened and the survival instinct took over. He knew he had to go back, and fast. The fear made him run, his heart pounding in his chest as if he were being chased by something much older and more evil than he could understand. By the time he reached the car, he could barely breathe. The image of the dark figure chasing him, its shadows dancing in an unnatural way, was still burned into his mind. The sense of dread was so intense that he couldn't even describe properly what he saw. All he knew was that he couldn't stay there. Not with that thing approaching. He was panicked, trembling. As he recounted what he saw, his voice faltered, and his friends looked at him with a mix of concern and disbelief. What had he really seen? What had been behind him? The fear still hung in the air as they tried to understand what was happening, unaware that the true threat might be closer than they thought. Panic spread quickly among the group. Raphael, gasping for breath, couldn't speak without trembling. His friends, not fully understanding what was going on, began to look around with more attention. But what do you do when your mind is paralyzed by fear? The gas station had seemed harmless at first, but now, every shadow, every distant sound, carried an invisible threat. They were at the epicenter of something much larger, and they could barely process it. The fear was palpable, a tightness in their chest that made even breathing more difficult. It was then that Raphael's voice interrupted the silence, revealing the horror he had witnessed. He spoke of something violent, but the details were confusing, like a nightmare that unraveled the moment one tried to understand it. However, the panic he displayed was real, genuine. The human mind, when frightened, tends to fill the gaps of the unknown with the worst. Raphael didn't know exactly what he had seen, but his words were clear. It felt like he was about to be attacked. Something was moving between the bushes, something that could have been more than a mere illusion. Fear sank deeper into the group's veins as they quickly moved away from the station and got in the car without looking back. The engine roared as if it understood the urgency of the situation, and the deserted road stretched ahead. But even the sound of the engine couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Terror accompanied them, and though they tried to speed away, the thought that the shadow might still be there, following them, didn't leave them. Even as the distance between them and the gas station grew, the fear didn't dissipate. Raphael's vision of the dark figure, and the idea of a violent attack, kept hammering in everyone's minds. Whatever he had seen seemed too real, and no matter how hard they tried to rationalize it, something inside them knew it wouldn't be that easy to escape. Horror accompanied them, like an invisible weight, and every minute that passed only made the fear grow. But what had really happened there? What would have happened if, instead of fleeing, they had stayed and faced whatever was hidden in the shadows? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The road now seemed even lonelier, as if they were traveling to an unknown place, where fear stretched further ahead, waiting for them at the next curve. Each person in the car was lost in their own thoughts. But what was at stake wasn't just Raphael's fear, but the doubt forming inside everyone. What if they had stayed? What would have happened if, instead of fleeing, they had faced whatever was hidden in those shadows? The questions echoed in everyone's mind like a distant echo, growing stronger with every mile. And the more they thought about it, the bigger the horror became, like an invisible disease starting to spread among them. The bushes, which had once seemed harmless, were now symbols of danger. The rapid, wide steps Raphael mentioned now filled the empty space in the car, and no one knew if the shadows around them were truly empty. The fear of what could have happened was growing, but what would be worse? What Raphael saw, or the fact that they didn't understand it in time. The terror of not knowing what was really stalking them, of not knowing if they were still being followed, seemed to be consuming their minds. The strangest thing was that, even with the distance between the station and the car, they could still feel something's presence there, lurking between the shadows along the road. Whatever it was, it didn't seem to end with their escape. Time was passing, but the feeling of dread didn't lessen. The simple fact that they were theoretically safe didn't relieve the weight of what could have been. There was something very wrong about the gas station, something none of them could explain. They hadn't seen the dark figure with their own eyes, except for Raphael, and no matter how much they tried to rationalize everything, a part of them knew there was more to this story than just a scare. What would have happened if they hadn't fled? Would the terror have consumed them right there? And that presence that was approaching Raphael, was it still watching them as they drove down the road, lost in the shadows? Their fear was just beginning to spread. As the group moved further away from the station, the shadows of the deserted road seemed to stretch on forever, as if terror was following them at every turn. But what terrified them the most wasn't the escape itself, but the feeling that something much darker was watching them. As the miles passed, Raphael's fear and the others' uncertainty turned into an uncomfortable truth. What if the dark figure hadn't gone away? What if the real terror wasn't in what he saw, but in what was waiting for them at the next stop? When they finally arrived at a nearby town, everyone was silent. But one of them, still looking in the rearview mirrors, asked, "What if we're being followed?" They had left the gas station behind, but had they left the fear behind? The horror of the shadows? The idea that what had chased them that night could still be lurking, waiting for the right moment to return? There was no way to know, but what everyone felt deep down was an uncomfortable certainty. The evil would never truly leave them in peace. And you, what do you think? What would have happened if they had stayed? Did they manage to escape something much more terrible than they imagined? Maybe true terror is always closer than we think, waiting for the right moment to catch us. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to continue hearing more terrifying stories like this one.